The thing I think that I took from the military that I brought to Harley was that you feel like you're doing something important, and you have this camaraderie with riders that you have like you had in the military. And you also have this sense of patriotism, especially now when more and more stuff feels like it's made overseas. And yeah, working here is pretty cool. My kids think it's neat that I work at Harley, definitely. One really cool tradition that we've established, when they were young, they're asking about going on a motorcycle trip. So for whatever reason, I said, when you turn 12, we'll go on a motorcycle trip, a long motorcycle trip. And I've done it with 3 of them so far. Beyond the coming year, the company has a great future ahead of us. We have some exciting products coming. We've got great plans on how to be a better company, and we're executing those right now. The ability to design and deliver cool products. I have not felt better about this company in my entire time here than I do right now. And that's 15 years. So we're poised for a lot of success, and I'm excited to be a part of it.
Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome H.O.G member Pat Koppa.
Good morning. Man, there is some energy in this room. It's awesome. I love it here. Let's try a little test. I just learned it in the beginning from Bruce. Ready? Start the rumble. All right, the first time. Very nice. I have to tell you that I am really, it's a pleasure and a privilege to be here speaking with you. When Bruce asked me to do this, I was really flattered. I'm like, really? Me? And so, yes, so I'm here and I'm thrilled to do it. This is a really fun part of my job. So to start out, I'd like to ask you a simple question. And I ask you to take a moment to think about it, okay? Why are you here? Why did your life lead you to a room in Salt Lake City, listening to me? But more important, why did you end up with a desire for the road, a love of motorcycling, and a passion for leadership and service as an officer in Harley Owners Group? So think of a person who got you started. Or maybe it's a year in your life when you first fell in love with riding. Maybe a special place like a road up in the hills or a dealership where you always felt welcome. That why, that's pretty important. That's what keeps us going when it gets tough. But what I'd like to talk to you about this morning is the how. How do you become the person for someone else? How does this year become the year to remember? How does your chapter become the place where people find this camaraderie and find themselves? So as you heard, I'm the Director of National Field Operations here in the U.S., all right? So for Harley-Davidson. And what that means in a nutshell is that I lead a team of 86 people that call on our dealers all over the U.S. and help them deliver the best experience possible to you, our customers. But I've been with the company for 15 years, like I said in the video, and I've done a bunch of different jobs. I've had a good fortune to do that. From supervising machinists in our factory to planning new motorcycles like the Softail Deluxe and the Street Glide, a couple examples, to leading the accessory business where I got to play with really cool things like boom audio systems, LED headlights, and really cool paint and wheels. That was a fun job. It's been a heck of a ride and a whole lot of fun. But I wouldn't have done any of it. In fact, none of us would even be here if it weren't for a very important year. 1903. Does that ring a bell to anybody? All right. That's the year Bill Harley and Arthur Davidson, with help from Arthur's brother Walter, finished their very first motor bicycle at a dinky little machine shop on the north side of Milwaukee, which happens to be my hometown, by the way. The engine was so small, about 116 cc's, that it couldn't even make it up a hill without pedaling. And by the way, that's cubic centimeters, not cubic inches. So like our 103 today, that's cubic inches. That's 1688 cc's. Our motor today is 15 times bigger than that original little motor in the shed. So you know why we did that? Because they didn't quit there. They kept going. They kept improving. And the history of Harley-Davidson over the past 110 years all comes from the first sound of a tiny little engine roaring to life. So take yourself back to 1903. Think about their passion, their pride, how dedicated, how focused they were. Of course, they were going to go broke if it didn't work, right? So they were pretty darn focused. Think how much they wanted to make a difference and make things better. In other words, they were a lot like you guys. You bring that same passion, pride, dedication, and focus to your chapters. You bring that same desire to make a difference. You bring that same willingness to keep going even when your first effort doesn't quite get you there. And that is how you become the leaders that your chapters need and that all of us need. That's how you find the places, the times, the people that become so important. The reasons to ride that we're all looking for. So how do I know this is true? Because I've seen this happen in my own life firsthand. So if you don't mind, I'm going to get a little informal and share a few stories with you about riding. So who out there would like to hear, let's talk about some riding for a little bit. Who wants to hear that? All right. This is all about being a mentor and bringing someone into the sport, showing them the way, if you will, okay? So for me, it starts back in 1998. I started with the company in 1997, working in the factory. Next, I went to work for Bill Davidson in motorcycle product planning. The first thing he did was said, you know, Pat, I think you should go to Sturgis. And I took the job with him in July, so boom, Sturgis, first thing I did. I'd never taken a long trip before. You know, I'd started the rumble, but I'd never heard the thunder yet. I had a group of mentors, employees that I rode out with who I'd never met before, but they welcomed me in with open arms. You know, I'd never done group riding. I didn't know about the staggered formation. I didn't know how fast these bikes could go. I didn't know you could ride at elevated speeds for extended amounts of time. I learned that. And you'll find out later I passed that on. You know, riding in the rain. These things slip around. You know, you get taught, no, the bike works in the rain. Tires don't slip. How about wind? Ooh, not a problem. What about food? Oh, man, there's food. There's road food. There's a lot of joy in those stops. And then there's that beer at the end of the day. Good crowd. One of my favorite scenes, stopping in South Dakota after a day of riding. And by the way, we take 2 lanes always when we go to Sturgis from Milwaukee. First little stretch of interstate, then 2 lanes, which is a great way to go. And we got into town in South Dakota, and I remember we pulled into the motel, and one of the guys in the group, Skip Metz, he swung by the gas station. Like, what? You know, we didn't need gas yet, really. And he pulls in, he's got a 12-pack on his luggage rack. You know, and that's a good way to end a ride. So I remember that lesson, right? The bottom line is they showed me the way, and I was hooked. I take a long ride or 2 every year now because it's part of my life. So life goes on. And so has it that I had a chance to pass it on to other people, like you have probably. The first story I'll tell you is about my Lebanese brother-in-law, Suhail. He married my wife's twin sister. This guy has some stones. He was born in Lebanon, raised in civil war, basically, in his later part of his life. He left on his own, flew on a plane in Milwaukee, Wisconsin, and ended up at Cardinal Stritch College. No idea what he was doing, but he got there on his own. Now he's a successful executive in the digital industry here in the U.S. and a great friend, a beloved friend of mine, like a brother. He was drawn to the Harley experience, like many people are. It's America, it's part of fulfilling his dreams, and he loves motorcycles. He rode sport bikes before. So he bought a bike, partially because of my influence, I'm sure. I was working at Harley at the time. But he hadn't ever really fully lived the dream or lived the experience. So for the 100th anniversary, I shipped my bike out to San Jose, where he's working in Silicon Valley. It was really a precursor to the Street Glide. It was a 100th anniversary standard that was all decked out like a Street Glide. He had a Road King Classic. We took that trip from San Jose to Milwaukee, took 6 days, and it was just epic. I learned that he could really pound miles on that Road King. I learned that fuel injection works a lot better in the mountains than my carbureted bike. We saw just some incredible sights like the Grand Tetons, Lake Tahoe, Yellowstone Park, Chief Joseph Highway, Bighorn Mountains, Black Hills of South Dakota, and the Badlands. I mean, these are like Look at this. These are goosebumps, man. I just love this stuff. It was monumental, and I helped him learn how to ride on a long trip overnight. We discovered America together, on the road, with the open air around you on a Harley Davidson. There's just no better way. So time passed, and I had another chance to pass it on and show somebody the way. This time it was my older brother, Tom, and my cousin, John. They happen to both live in Milwaukee, and they're dear friends of mine. Well, they bought Harleys too. And I think it was at least partially due to my influence working at the company. I kind of got convinced to try out this Harley thing. But they also only partially understood what they had under themselves. You know, they took day trips. We went out for short rides with our wives and things like that. But they had never gone on an overnight long-distance trip. Well, their eyes were opened when I took them to Sturgis back in 2005. Like, hey, wow, this is motorcycling. So I remember, so we leave Milwaukee and we head out on Interstate 94. We head west on I-94 and go for about 2 hours, get off, and then we take 2 lanes from there. So I hit it kind of hard because we wanted to cover some ground. It wasn't too bad. And my cousin John's kind of a careful guy with his bike. It was always clean. He kind of babied it, didn't want to break it. You know, it's a hard. So we get off the bikes at the first gas stop. And by the way, my stories always have conversations that happen at the gas station, because that's where you get off and have all these great reflections on what you just experienced, right? So we get off at the first gas stop, and John's words are, wanders over me kind of, cool, and wow, these things do pretty well at 80 miles an hour for a while. So I kind of realized I think he's never been over 65 on his bike before. He was afraid he was going to ruin it. I said, hell yeah, John, that's the sweet spot, man. They ride great. So we took the northern route. We went up the Mississippi River, went through Minnesota, found a little dumpy motel on Lake Mille Lacs that was amazingly cruddy but so awesome that we found this place. They had beers on their deck and had some cocktail, some bar food, a couple cigars. We took North Dakota, all 2-lane highway. And if you've taken that stretch, I'm not sure if you guys ride that much, but it's oddly beautiful. It's kind of straight road, but it kind of goes up and down. You have these little ponds along the way, and they got a farm like every, 10 miles or so. You go by some little ounce of civilization. On this whole trip, like the major excitement was when a low-flying bird exploded on my highway pegs, and they told me later it was a cloud of feathers behind me, so I didn't even know that. Glad I provided that entertainment. And then the other excitement was racing a train, nothing dangerous. But I remember it's so flat there, we could see this freight train from, I'm telling you, maybe 10 miles away. And we were going this way, and it was coming this way, and it was a race to the crossing. And we wouldn't have crossed if we were at risk. But we beat that train. It was a really cool experience. And we got off the bikes, and that's what we all talked about. Man, that bird, poof, wow, that train was so cool. And I can still picture it in my mind on the horizon, that train. It was neat. So anyway, I'm thinking about this as I'm passing the miles in North Dakota, and I'm loving it, and I'm hearing that sound we all love, right? And just that pulse you feel, right? So I think it's great. But I'm wondering about my brother, my older brother, my mentor, who I looked up to when I was in high school. I kind of copied a lot of the stuff he did, got into sports because he did. But here he bought a Harley because I did, and I was loving this is brain-clearing experience, and the wind and the air and the farms every 10 miles. But I'm thinking, I wonder if he's thinking this is a lot of hype and this is really boring. What's he thinking? A little nervous, actually. So the next gas stop, we get off, and I got my question answered. My brother walks over to me after filling up his tank, and he says, little brother, this is the biggest damn adventure I've ever been in my entire life. How about that? He thinks of it as being a cowboy in the Old West. It's like an iron horse, literally. You're out there in the middle of nowhere. And it's kind of scary, but you know what? You grab yourself and go, hey, if something happens, we'll figure it out. And I think that's the part he loved. We finished our ride the last day or night before we went to Sturgis. We finished on the Missouri River at Bob's Fish Camp. Who here has ever been to Bob's Fish Camp? Okay, a couple. It's a pretty neat experience. It's in the middle of grassland, right? Right along the Missouri River. Of course, going there was a direct route going south at that point. And we had 20 miles to go on the map, and then we hit a detour sign because the road was closed. And we had to go 30 miles, and 20 miles back. So it became an hour and a half instead of 20 minutes in about a 40-mile-an-hour dust storm wind. But we got to Bob's Fish Camp, and I'm going to relay back to that first part of the story, my first ride. these guys go over to the cabins. We might show a picture of. We go over to the cabins, and I go register. The registration's in the gas station. Guess what they sell in the gas station? So I grab a six-pack of Bud. I put it on my luggage rack in the back under the webbing, right? I pull up to the cabin where my brother and my cousin are waiting for us. And my cousin to this day says, man, when I saw you pull up with that six-pack in your luggage rack, I was so happy. It had been a long day. So I showed them the way, and they heard the thunder. And now they're old pros, like many of you guys. They know the drill, and they're hooked. Recently, we rode up to a hog rally in Maine 2 summers ago with John and Tom again. And that ride was a chance to test our mettle. One of those tests was Mount Washington. You may not go there because you're out west, but that's the highest point, one of the highest points on the East Coast. 6,000 feet high, nothing like your mountains here, but a pretty good ride. It sounded like a good idea. It was going really well until we found out the last mile is gravel. And off the side of the gravel is like a straight drop. And it was even worse when the car in front of me, and I'm leading these two guys, the car in front of me comes to a stop. And I'm thinking, dude, really? Stopping? I'm at an angle, I got to drop, and I'm at stop, starting on gravel. It's like, this is like my worst scenario. But we all three got the bikes moving, no burnouts, got to the top, and we conquered that mountain. So that's on top of Mount Washington. It was pretty cool. So on this trip, testing our mettle, there were multiple days in the rain. And we learned, even when it's miserable, you know it's going to be a great story. The last part of the trip, and I'll wrap up my stories here, was coming through Chicago. We were too cheap to take the high-speed ferry across Lake Michigan where we could have relaxed, had a cigar, and recapped our ride. Instead, no, we'll drive through Chicago. Well, coming through Gary, Indiana, it starts pouring. I mean downpouring. And it rained a torrential downpour all the hour-and-a-half ride through Chicago. But we kept going. Stuck in one lane, let the trucks move around us, and went 60 miles an hour, goggles down, looking through that little crack between your spotted goggles and your visor on your headlight and your helmet, pinging you in the eyeball, kind of squinting. But we just kept going, man. And they were there right with me, trusting me. And I don't know why, but they did. So this particular ride, it was raining so hard that I actually got passed by a boat. I'm not kidding you. I did. Now, of course, it wasn't driving, but it was a watercraft on a trailer. And probably the coolest part of that passing is there's a young guy. Traffic's moving by us. We're making pretty good speed, but he was kind of moving by us. This guy with the personal watercraft passing me made it a point to stop and slow down, not stop, but slow down and pace speed. And he stayed there until I'm, again, squinting, trying to see the road. And I see this guy slow down. I look over at him, and it's this young guy, right? He's kind of looked pretty cool guy out in his watercraft. Looks over at me. He wanted to wait till I made eye contact. I looked over at him. He looks over at me and goes, dude. I got to tell you, I felt pretty good about myself. So these are the moments that make life interesting and worth living. At least they've made my life pretty wonderful. I could go on and tell you about all our family tradition, like the trips I've taken with my sons when they turned 12. Jack to Yosemite. Yeah, that was cool. Luke from Texas all the way to Milwaukee for the 105th anniversary. And then Mitch, hog rally out in Rhode Island, where we spent a lot of time meeting hog members, and we went to Niagara Falls on the way out. Just great memories. Okay? And then, of course, my 12-year-old daughter's trip is still coming up. That's this summer. And by the way, she's been talking about it for 6 years. Okay, so I think you get the point of where I'm going. Now, how do you take all this and make it your own? How do you build up the sound of thunder in your own riding life? And how do you take your chapter from good to great? Now, I'm not going to tell you. However, I am going to promise you this. That's exactly what you're going to learn this weekend. So pay attention, soak it up, try out some new ideas, some new approaches, and the rewards will be fantastic. You can show people the way. Harley-Davidson is committed to making H.O.G even better, taking something that's great and making it greater, and keeping H.O.G's power strong. Because you are playing an instrumental role in the best riding club in the world. Yes. So to close, I'd like to say thank you. And please, keep on riding the best motorcycles in the world, Harley Davidson. Thank you, everyone.